Hello, namaste, and welcome everyone to the Garuda podcast. Our author today is the very well known, well read, and erudite Professor Subhash Kak, who I'd like to welcome to the show. Namaste and welcome, Professor Kak.
Thank you, Sankrant. Glad to be on your show.
So, the book we are today going to speak about, and let's see if this comes up on the screen. It's called Project Omega. Project Omega is the book, and this is about the future of life in the solar system. And I was reading the book, Professor Kage. It's such an enjoyable read. It's almost like a whimsical book. Looks like you're just having a lot of fun with it. So what got you to write it, and why now? What was the impetus at this moment of time in history? And this book is about time in a sense.
Well, the idea came from my co-author Menas, who's a very well-known um, cosmologist, originally trained at MIT. He's a native of Greece, and he has lived in the US for many, many years. He's a professor in California. So he wrote to me, and we've done certain things together. We've written certain stuff on time together, on black holes and all that. In particular, something we did recently was how time might also have three dimensions, just as space has three dimensions. Something very, very interesting. But that's a separate story. So, with all that in background, Menas wrote to me about a year ago. He says, "What about this? What about the whole question of future of Earth? Because there's so much of energy invested in political arena on the question of climate change and all that. In fact, that's driven a lot of progressive politics in the West for some time. So he said, but what about the larger problem of the long-term future of Earth? Of course, it's very long-term. It's millions of years into the future. But I think from a philosophical point of view, it is important to consider it because that also has implications on what we ought to be doing in the short term. And what is it that really defines us as humans, as living beings on Earth, and what is our responsibility, the larger responsibility? And so that's how we got started. And we went back and forth, and we then decided that we will not only focus on astronomy and cosmology, but also look at other questions that relate to who we are, namely the matter of consciousness, because we are physical beings, but we are conscious physical beings. So, what is consciousness? And that is something which is really the very heart of Indian wisdom, Vedic wisdom. The Vedas are all about consciousness. And that is because one could make the argument that all our knowledge resides in our consciousness. So before we explore the outer cosmos, we should also have a handle on the inner cosmos.
No, that's such a vast topic, and it's something that has interested me forever, really. And the question I've always asked is that there's this mechanical view of the world which sees consciousness as an emergent property from the complexity of matter, uh, whereas the Indic Vedantic, and to me the most logical view, is that matter is in a way an emergent property, or at least a quality that emerges from consciousness, that is in a way perception, and consciousness has to be the primary force. So I know your book touches upon it, and it's really nice because I find your book is leaving, it's not, it's not there to give us answers, but it's really trying to pose some very interesting thought experiments and questions. And one of the ones that I've always pondered on, relating back to the Indian text as well, is that, is there life outside the planet. I mean, the Indian cosmology and the Indian treatments would certainly say that it's, we are just a speck. That modern notion that we are just a speck is very much reflected there. But uh, what is your view both on what is the Indic view of that and your view of uh, is there already life outside before we talk about making earthly life multiplanetary?
The Indic view, as told to us in the Puranas, is that the solar system that we live in is just one of many, many similar systems, that there is life everywhere. And in a certain sense, recent astronomy and biology, astrobiology, has demonstrated the correctness of this view, because now they find these organic molecules. The earlier theory was that they emerged on Earth in the primal soup of chemicals, but now they find them on all these asteroids and the outer planets as well. The idea now is that these molecules, how did they assemble themselves? The probability of these complex organic molecules assembling themselves and then staying stable in these hostile environments is literally infinitesimally small. So, how did they assemble themselves? So, therefore, even in a chemically biological sense, there is life everywhere, because these organic molecules are the very precursors to higher life. So, that's one side to it. The other side, which I think is very interesting, and I touch upon that, or we touch upon that book rather briefly, and I mentioned it in this think about dimensions of time. And as I said, I recently wrote a paper showing how when a black hole collapses, the space and time dimensions interchange, and therefore time should have three dimensions as well. But then this is something which is a part of narratives in the Puranas. In the Puranas, there is mentioned both of the possibility of time flowing at a rate much lower than what we experience on Earth. There are lots of very fascinating stories related to that, like what relativity theory also tells us, and also stopping of time altogether. And as we know, modern physics, relativity theory says time can now travel at a rate which is much slower if you are in a very fast spaceship. But you can also stop the passage of time by what is called the quantum Zeno effect. If you observe a system, then the unfolding of time in that system will slow down, or it can be altogether stopped. In fact, that's one of the chapters in the book, uh, that uh, one could make use of this in hoping or in trying to uh, connect up with other civilizations across the universe. And that apart, even in this life, if you make use of the quantum Zeno effect by doing what is the process of self observation, which is apparently what the yogis did, one can extend life, which is a interesting possibility, um, which is a kind of a take of you think about the outer cosmos, and then you come back to the present and the the environment that we live in, and we determine that we can control it in different ways.
I think time is a big factor, and also, in the book you cover you. It's such a vast brush that you paint with, and I'm going to ask you in a little bit to actually read some passages from it. So think about that while we are still talking, and you can pick out a favorite one. I've also put a QR code on the side, which is actually taking you to the India Garuda Life.in site with the book Project Omega, written by Professor Subhash Kak. And how do you pronounce this name?
Menas Kafatos.
Menas
Menas
Kafatos.
Kafatos.
Menas
Uh,
Kafatos. the co-author on this book. So you can also, of course, find it on Amazon.com in the US or GarudaLife.com also in the US. Definitely pull it up with the code and go ahead and order it. But coming back to this, Professor Kag, it's a very interesting thing because we haven't really, um, in a way, there are parts of it that are much more science fiction like in the current environment, although some of it may be more science than fiction uh, in more recent times with all the talk about going to Mars and possibly even seeing something like that happen in our lifetimes. I don't see that aspect so much in the Indic tradition per se, but it's definitely been part of the last I would say at least 100 years of science fiction emerging from the West of the colonization of other planets and spaceships and going into hyperspace to do the jump and many many things like that. So realistically, do you think we're going to see this? We're going to see a colony in Mars in our lifetime?
Well, people like Elon, and there is a Mars Society in the US, they believe that we would be on Mars in the next 15, 20 years. Certainly by 2050, there are some people who are projecting very large colonies, maybe tens of thousands of people. I personally don't think it would be so big, maybe some 100 people or so. Now, you mentioned science fiction. Something very interesting out here, as we all know, one of the people who's pushing uh, for colonies on Mars is Elon Musk, the world's wealthiest man. Now, what's interesting is that his name has a fascinating background. After the Second World War, Werner von Braun, who was a very clever space or rocket scientist in Germany, he and many other such scientists were brought over to the US and they were put under house arrest for a few years. But finally, they became the prime movers of NASA, America's space exploration effort. Now, while he was in in house arrest, he wrote a book on a science fiction book on colonization of Mars. And what's interesting about that is he visualized people going there in spaceships in the future. And once they land there, they discover there are underground colonies of people who are living there. And just as we have a political system here, with the chief as president or prime minister or king, depending upon which part of the globe you're looking at, the chief on Mars, the official title there is Elon. The president on Mars is called Elon. So these Earthlings meet Elon and this and that and learn a lot about how life is organized on Mars, and so that's a very interesting one of those what shall we call coincidences name. I don't know whether Elon got his name because his dad had read that book, or is it just a coincidence? Now, talking
It might
once
just be
again about
reality following.
consciousness. Oh, absolutely. Talking of consciousness, one of the very subtle Vedanta systems that focus on consciousness is the so called Kashmir Shaivism idea. And according to Kashmir Shaivism, which is also Vedanta, where talking of, instead of saying, using the term Parabrahma, you say Param Shiva, accepting that you can get into a personal relationship with Shiva. But what's interesting there is that uh, in the Kashmir Shaivite Vedantic tradition, it is stated that the one proof that Param Shiva exists or cosmic consciousness exists is the idea of chamatkar. And chamatkar is one of those probabilities that you cannot explain otherwise. This is the kind of a chamatkar that Ramanujan speaks of. And he says that, in fact, I just yesterday or the day before saw a reference to one of his published papers very complicated formula where the footnote that he gives himself is that this formula came to me in a dream. Now, how is it possible? Because we know when we have closed our eyes, the working space there is very small. We can just see one or two letters at all, objects. How did such a complicated formula come to him in a dream? And I think that is, as the philosophers of Kashmir Shaivism say, that is one proof of consciousness not just being an emergent phenomena on the brain processes, because that still keeps it materialistic, but rather the fundamental entity. And as we know also from the foundations of quantum mechanics itself, quantum mechanics, you cannot reduce the physicality, materiality into the observer. The observer is always outside of the system. And the creators of quantum mechanics, in particular, Erwin Schrödinger, who was an Austrian, Vedantin, he always used to travel. Whenever he traveled anywhere, he would carry the Bhagavad Gita with him. So Schrödinger mentions that, look, the central idea of quantum mechanics came to him from the Upanishads, the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma, that this object is a superposition of all possibilities. So we see, if we were to accept at face value what people like Schrodinger and many, many others, the deepest thinkers in the West, in case we don't want to listen to people in India itself, but people in the West, open minded people who claim that the central ideas that have transformed the world, because quantum mechanics is the foundational physical theory. Without quantum mechanics, you cannot explain chemistry, physics, first of all, and chemistry and biology. This is the central theory. And this has two sides to it, two axioms. One is that of superposition, the other is of collapse, that you get one of the many possibilities, which is already a part of Vaisheshika. So these central ideas were already there. How were they in Indian thought 2,500 years ago, if not earlier? And the only way we can see that is as some kind of a chamatkar, or the very fact that Sayanacharya, who wrote his bhashya on the Rig Veda, who was a minister in the Vijayanagar Empire, he mentions a specific figure with the Surya, 2,202 yojanas in half a nimesha, which is exactly equal to the speed of light. How did he mention it? There were no telescopes then. Such experiments had not been done. So all this stuff is given to us, to every human being, because every human being has the same Atma. We are all the same. There's no, just the opposite of what the critics of the Indian civilization tell us. Uh, India accepts radical equality amongst all people, amongst all beings, the same Atma. And the same Atma has the capacity to obtain this incomparable wisdom, which we could call, you know, the gods steering humanity in a specific direction. Because when we listen to this wisdom, it tells us what is to be done at each personal level and perhaps collectively also in society.
In fact, that's one of the things that really struck me in reading so many of the Indic texts was the universality of that vision. It's actually, as you said, it's not people. They're, let alone people and men and women and children. They are talking about, Kak Bushundi and all these, like the crow who's sitting and who's observing everything, and all the definitely enlightenment in all of the animal kingdom, and then in the plants, and every living being actually is part of that cosmos and capable of experiencing that to some extent and cognizing that. But returning back to the book itself, I think, how why Project Omega? Why isn't it an alpha of sorts also, where we're actually going out in the search, and we don't know where it ends, or it's the ending, or how are you seeing Omega in your thinking?
Omega from Menas. Menas, since he's Greek and he's also into Vedanta in a very, very big way. He has done it for many, many years. And as you can see from the title of this book, he's added Arvind to his name. This is
Yeah.
the first time he's used Arvind as his first name. Otherwise, all his books, and he's had some New York Times bestsellers as well, is just Menas Kafatos. Here it's Arvind Menas Kafatos. So he's done Vedanta in a very deep way, and Alpha to Omega. So he's looking, of course, at the Greek alphabet. Omega is the final letter in the Greek alphabet. So the thought came to him because, as I said, the idea for the book came to him. He said, well, let's talk of the biggest problem there is. The biggest, the greatest problem, the grandest problem. Because you could talk about, hey, we have shortage of lithium batteries, or we have our windmills are not working, or electricity shortage. Those are alpha problems. They are problems of now. So what is the grandest problem of all? That is humanity, not now, but in the distant future. And nobody has thought about that problem ever. We always talk about now. Okay, or what is the meaning of life? That's also a grand problem. But the grand problem in a physical sense. So, what happens to mankind? Because here we are worrying about Earth now, or the water levels in the sea rising, but it is a fact provided to us by astronomy that at some point, as the sun runs out of its energy, sun will become a red giant. It'll become bigger and bigger and bigger, and it'll probably swallow Mercury and maybe Venus. And it'll become when it becomes that big, everything on Earth will be incinerated. So Earth will be destroyed if it doesn't fall into the sun. And so we must prepare for that eventuality. And how do we prepare for it? And well, first of all, we must focus more energy on going to outposts beyond Earth, and the very first one is the Moon, and then the second one, which is possible to colonize right now, is Mars. The environment on Mars is not all that radically different from Earth, and it's about the same size and so on. And then go to the outer planets, and beyond that, look at the possibilities in other star systems. And we don't know where physics is going to take us. uh, Certainly, from relativity theory itself, if you're on a very fast spaceship, if your speed comes closer to the speed of light, then time literally stops. So you can go from one corner of the cosmos to another in zero time. So all kinds of possibilities, which appear what sci-fi, science fiction like, but it's quite possible that physics itself will take all those turns and open up possibilities so that humanity would more realistically be able to look at these questions of where it would be in the distant future. And so this is something that had not been considered by anybody as far as we know, and therefore Menas thought that calling it Project Omega was a good one.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, you're talking about extinction level events, many different kinds of extinction level events. So in that sense also there is the finality, but you're not talking about that as a, doomsday or the end times in the Abrahamic framework, but you're talking about how we can plan to avoid the extinction level events.
Oh, absolutely. Not end times, but if certainly, as we see from the chamatkars all around us, even in personal lives, because chamatkar is something that happens all the time, and that's what gives us the capacity to do things beyond where we are stuck. Because this is something else which is very fascinating, and it comes up from this whole idea of what LLMs can do, what AI agents can do. They can literally do all that we can do. So then the question arises, in what sense are we different from AI agents? In fact, a couple of months ago, I was in Austin, and my host drove me around the city 4 or 5 days at all hours of the day in a full self-driving car. He didn't touch the steering wheel any moment. His foot was not on the accelerator or the brake pedal any moment, and drove perfectly. So machines can do that. You can have conversation with AI agents on one of the many platforms that are available to people all around the world. You'll see that AI agents are not all that different from us. And if they are not, then the question of who we are, and this really takes us back beyond what are algorithmic um, um, systems, and certain ideologies are algorithmic because they tell you this is what the cosmos is, this is what's going to happen, and you just live in a machine like way, which is, in my view, like an AI like existence without true consciousness. So I think all that is happening right now, the AI revolution, the prospects of collapse of the world population. And I think that is to a great extent um, unstoppable. All of those take us back to the question which is central to the Indian tradition, to the Vedas, which is what is consciousness? What is our true being? And I think, in some sense, the Puranas also speak of this cyclic system of ages, and from Kali Yuga, you enter back into Satya Yuga. Maybe we've reached that inflection point, and the whole universe. So, in other words, I'm very optimistic rather than the pessimism of end times. I'm talking of an optimism that humanity, because of all that is happening, the disruptions that are being caused, and greater disruptions to follow in the coming decades, that humanity would be ready for wisdom to receive, first of all, to pose these questions in as directness as is possible, and then receive this wisdom, which in the Vedantic tradition is also called recognition, self recognition, pratyabhigya, for example. Um, Self recognition, because all this is within us. I am Atma Brahma, or Shivoham. The wisdom is within us. So how do we turn the gaze, so to speak, and find all those treasures which are already within us, because they reside in our consciousness. Now, as an aside, I should also tell you that as far as creativity is concerned, and all the amazing things that have been brought to us by modern science and technology, some of the biggest um discoveries were made, uh, according to uh, uh, the guys who made these discoveries, because people have done research on this. They were made either spontaneously or when people were dreaming. So, in other words, all these the gods speak to us when we.
I think Professor Kak just got disconnected a little bit. I'm going to add him back in. I think we'd lost you there for a moment, Professor Kak, but
Yes,
hopefully you're with us and here.
yeah. Yeah, let me continue with the thought. We
Sure.
were talking about how um, discoveries are made spontaneously, and some of the big discoveries which changed the world. For example, the invention of the sewing machine. This happened in the U.S., and this person, Howe was his name. He saw a dream in which some cannibals were going to be taking him to a cauldron and to cook him. And as they were carrying him, and he was terrified in his dream, he saw one of the cannibals standing up with a uh, with a pole, at the end of which was the tip with a hole. And he immediately woke up and he realized that what he needed was a needle with a hole with an eye at the other end. And that's how that discovery was made. And he got a patent, and that changed what happens in houses, because before that, women had to spend a lot of time and darning and sewing and all that stuff. And likewise, the structure of the benzene ring, Kekule discovered it. I think it was 1850. He dozed off, and he saw six snakes, each holding the tail of the other in its mouth, which is the six carbon atoms in a circle. So a lot of these discoveries, and as we know, in Mandukya Upanishad, it is stated that there are, four states: the awake state, this dream state, the deep sleep state, and the fourth one. And it's in the dream state that a lot of ideas come to you, because you are outside of the box. You can make discoveries only when you are outside of the box. So now, in our modern age, and this is the age where everybody is in the box, because you are stuck to the social media. And the social media is like the light which falls on you, so that you cannot go outside of the present. And if you're not outside of the present, you become like a machine yourself, because in the present, during the day, we must conform to the rhythms of the world around you. So you are like a cog in the larger machine. And and uh, the consciousness speaks to you when you are sleeping. And in fact, in Sanskrit, they use the term hiranya garbha. That's where ideas come to you. And I think when things are the worst, when people are in that um, in that AI mode the most, as will happen in the unfolding AI age, that's when ultimately people will have or will be pushed to discover the meaning within themselves. And I think that's what's going to be happening. And I think that was one of the motivations for Menas and I writing this book, to stress that now is the time not only to look at the biological future of humanity, but to explore consciousness for what it is.
Absolutely. And the book we are talking about is called Project Omega: The Future of Life in the Solar System. This is by Professor Subhash Kak and Professor Kafatos Minasi Kafatos. And the AI is such a big topic. I know Professor Kak has written a book for us on AI itself and the age of artificial intelligence that I hope people can find. I'm sure we could easily do a 1 hour segment just talking about AI, but I know there's a chapter in the book, so I don't feel terribly bad about bringing it up in the context of this book. Two questions come to me. Firstly, especially in the light of what you said, and this is comes of me, playing with AI over the last, couple of years since it's emerged, and of course earlier in my work in computer science long time ago. But mostly from my recent experiences, and also in the way the algorithms themselves are designed, at least current algorithms, which are largely, curve fitting algorithms, for lack of a better word, or a very simplistic notion, neural networks that are being trained on specific kinds of data, and then you extend it. But uh, that doesn't really uh, allow for the tapping into the Hiranyagarbha. It doesn't allow for the tapping into that creativity that is coming from that dreamlike state, which is not an extension of the data that is already there, right? And this is what I find current AI models, I'm sure they're going to improve, or maybe they cannot transcend that. We don't know the answer to that question. But at least my hypothesis right now is that they're somewhat limited by having to be stuck with existing data and having no possibility of divine guidance, and being able to tap into that source of that. But I think the other related questions coming to the extinction level event, and you talk about the population collapse in relationship to AI. I wonder, for instance, with China's population decreasing, whether all they're going to do is have smaller and smaller people and more robots running the show. And do we even need that many people in that model? So how does that play out?
Firstly, China's population, demographers believe that China's population by the end of this century will be one fourth of what it is now, only 300 odd million. So they won't need as many humans, but all of globe won't need that many humans. And one projection, which we do mention in the book, this is from Wittgenstein Institute of Demography in Vienna, is that by 2300 the world population will be 1/80th, not 1/8, 1/80th of what it is now. All of the globe will have only 100 million people because you won't need so many people. Now this is one side. The other side is uh, the the nature of AI. You're absolutely right. AI does nothing but do pattern recognition, and one can prove. In fact, I proved a theorem, which I think is a very important result. More attention should be given to it. I proved a theorem in 2023 in the leading journal of the field. It's called Journal of AI and Consciousness, where I showed computers will never be conscious, machines will never be conscious. So complexity itself cannot lead to consciousness. So indeed, machines will not be conscious. So that's one side. But that doesn't matter. Even the machines are not conscious, machines will still take over, directed by just a small number of people. And humans are quite often happy, not quite often, all the time, happy uh, to cede decision making to machines. So that is the other side, and machines will increasingly determine what people do, and then there will be, it'll be like the empire in Star Wars, and then there'll be people who are fighting it, and perhaps uh, not not necessarily violent interaction, but at some level there would be an attempt um, to restore the balance, because machines can't do consciousness, but machines will make it easier for us to do various tasks that are necessary, which are laborious, which are difficult, and we will very happily use them. Now, the other point is that this is all consistent with Vedanta. According to Vedanta, our normal state is the Pashu state, which is like a instinct-driven machine kind of a state, and we are Pashus because we are bound by modes of behavior and karmic connections, which are called pashas. Pashas are like these ropes to the whole chain of behavior. So we don't have any freedom. We have freedom only when we discover the Pashupati within us, who is Shiva, who is the who is the source of consciousness, who is consciousness within us. So the whole thing is to therefore uh, um, in that state where population is much lower, which leads to social problems as well, because people feel lonely and so on. And addiction is also another kind of a pasha. Why are people getting addicted? These are very smart people. In the US, 120,000 people dying of fentanyl overdose, fentanyl and other drug overdose a year. Why? Because the normal uh, state for a pashu is to get bound. A pashu is very happy, like a sheep or like a cow. We want to be bound. We want somebody to be taking care of us. And the state of the free person is the state of the warrior. That's a very tough state, and that is the awakened individual. And so the Project Omega is also to point to every reader that that is what this state, not just in the distant future, but in our current lifetimes also, for each individual, is to find that Omega point where you are free and where you are one with consciousness in the whole cosmos.
Absolutely, and I think the coming back to the this AI and extinction thing, I wonder whether some. I remember there was this whole Malthusian theory at not very long ago, just in the middle of the 20th century, where they were positing, a population is going to explode and humans consume all the resources, which was one doomsday theory, and then it seems to be almost in the fabric of I would say almost these models of collapse where you find doomsday one way or you find it the other way in terms of population collapse. So it might be that the reality is somewhere in the middle of it. Uh, but I think this book, again, I highly recommend it. It's quirky, it's whimsical, and it takes you on this journey into so many dimensions of time and space and future and past and present and animals and humans and share it with us, and what you'd like to read, because I think it's really good to go back to doing a book podcast where we actually read a bit of the book and hopefully have the audience and the reader curious for more, because this book is just a delight, and I really urge everybody to pick it up. So give us a taste of it, please.
Well, Sankrant, I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of the book right now in front of
Ah,
me.
you don't have it in your hand. Okay, no worries, no worries. So maybe I'll just point to one or two passages that I really
Uh,
loved. I mean, the passage on AI, of course, this world population and the future of evolution is really interesting. Collapsing world population and the future of evolution. This is the topic we were just talking about, and I think it's really nice to look at both. I mean, I don't know if it's nice or not, but I think it's good to see both those scenarios happening. Just the doomsday that we are predicting a few decades ago, I think it's really interesting to put it in the context of that, where everybody was worried about population explosion. And I don't know if many people know this, that Ford Foundation and the US funded a lot of population control projects in India, including selective abortions, because they were very afraid that population explosion in India, or a large population, will lead to a communist state happening in India. So there were some theoreticians who had said that very poverty and that kind of environment will create communist states. So we have to curb it as much as possible. And ironically, China, of course, put the most drastic curbs on curbing the population from a state level. And now we are at a situation where we are looking at the other reality of it coming into collapse. And I sometimes wonder, and you also mentioned that South Korea and all these other countries, even in Europe, have tried state level incentives, which don't seem to really do very much to change the curve. So, uh, one of my theories is that, we've had this long history, and this is definitely true in India when I look at it, is that we have this state trying to do social engineering, uh, and this has definitely been true since we've had the colonial state for at least last 150 years or so, where the state is actively trying to social engineer one or the other outcome. And the plea that arises from my own heart is just like, leave the people alone, like let them be. We don't have to really engineer our way out of a situation, because oftentimes the limited understanding that these social scientists and engineers often bring through the problem uh, might cause more damage than it actually solves. So, what is your thought on that in terms of some of the ideas of the book and some of the ideas of, even people like Elon? And this book, of course, has a very interesting reference, as Professor Kak mentioned, uh, to an Elon who was a fictional character, having a similar role, if not a similar role, but being related to Mars as the leader. So, what is your thought on that? Are we overthinking and over engineering the problem, or is it something that we really need to talk about?
Well, you're right. In the 1960s, Club of Rome, the problem was what will happen? The world is getting overpopulated, so that'll be a big crisis. But I think the central technological event that occurred was 1960 or so, with the invention of the birth control pill. And the population in UK and USA amongst the whites dipped below replacement rate in as early as 1970, very soon after the invention of the birth control pill. So one of the reasons why social scientists have fanned outside of Europe and the US to the far corners of the globe is the worry related to disparity in the population of different groups on Earth. But in spite of all that has been tried, and what has been tried has certainly had an impact. It has had an impact on family size in India, for example, uh, and elsewhere as well. But uh, more recently, these issues have been used in the West as a way of control, because as globalists, you can say, okay, now this is what you should do, or this is what you should do, but that hasn't had an impact on controlling the population. In the population of the white population of the USA, for example, right now is only 59%. It was in the 80s, 40 or 50 years ago. Now it's 59%. It's going to fall below 50% in many of the European countries in the next few decades. So right now, the only two regions where the population is above uh, the uh, the replacement figure of 2.1 for the fertility rate is sub-Saharan Africa and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So these are the regions. But even those regions, the population is going to come down. The population growth is going to come down. So what is really going on is different groups using this for short-term uh, benefit or advantage of control, political control. But look, we mentioned China. China uh, had state policy of one child, and that had an impact. And now their fertility rate has fallen to about one or above one. But even more drastic in a state where there was no such policy is South Korea, where it has fallen to 0.68. Now, I asked Grok, which is the AI version of X. I asked Grok the other day, I said, when will my community, which is the Kashmiri Pandit community, disappear? And in a second, it came back. It said in 6 generations. It said the Kashmiri Pandits have on an average, uh, 1.1 children per family. And so in 6 generations, there'd be less than 1,000 left. And there's nothing you can do about it because, that's where the world is going. And in the richer countries, having children is so expensive. In United States, um, childcare can be 30 or $40,000 a year, and a lot of people don't make that kind of money. A lot of people make a huge amount of money, but most people don't make that much of money. And so, one result of that is that most couples postpone having children, and at a certain point, then they're not able to have children, and many others choose to have just one child from the get go, or at most have two, and the average therefore is falling close to one, and that takes you um, to this future of the whole world population falling to 100th or 1/80th of what it is in the next 6 or 7 generations, not just for the Kashmiri community, but for everybody around the world on an average.
And whenever one hears things like that, the engineering response sometimes, or the young people response, or the meme response is, "Oh, what can we do about it? What shall we do about it?" Right? As if there is some magical thing that one could do that would change the trajectory of things. And but at the same time, I think it's still I still have to beg the question, which is, what is a takeaway that you'd give to a young person who reads this book? Of course, the first takeaway is to read the book, but and I'd love to see more and more people get a hold of it. As I said, it's a delightful book. It's a short read. It did not take me long to read through it at all, and it touches on so many topics that it's really the cosmos in a nut shell. So yes,
Well,
how would you like to read this?
this whole prospect of population collapse can be very frightening, but one must note that the world population before about 2,000 years ago, before it started building up very rapidly, the whole global population has been estimated to have been about 100 million, which is what it's expected to fall back to in the next two centuries or so. Now, the other point is that, look, what is the right amount of population for the globe? Apart from the efforts to colonize Moon and the Mars and other planets, what is the right population? How many people does an individual know on an average? Maybe 50 or 100. That won't change. It'll still be 50 or 100 in the distant future. So social stuff will be about the same. People will be connected much more to nature. And I think most important of all, the question of who we are, the fact that we are truly consciousness, as Krishna, Sri Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita. Our bodies are like the clothes that we discard, but our true self is within us. I think truly, from a optimistic perspective, all this is going in the right direction. People all across the globe will ask these questions when they're alone, because they'll be much more alone. They'll say, we want to tear ourselves away from this AI tyranny, not AI tyranny only of technology, of modern technology, but AI tyranny of old ideologies also, which tell you this is who you are. Just believe in this and nothing else. Don't ask, don't question, because this will take us to an age of questioning, and that's the way life should be about. In fact, we should encourage it so that everybody is able to realize their potential. And that's where beauty lies. That's where ananda lies. That's where soundarya lies. And I think that's what the future of humanity ought to be, and of every human being. And not just every human being, we also must be compassionate to animals. And they can also see that beauty in the sunrise. Anybody who has had a pet, we see that our pets really are not all that different from us. They love, they are in the moment.
we worry a lot more about, future and the past. They are in the moment. They are as much of love and other emotions. So I think personally, I'm as an optimist, I think this is all for the good, and the machines will do what is drudgery. We some All of that needs to be done, but the tomorrow should be a beautiful day. Tomorrow, metaphorically, for everybody, should be a beautiful day.
On that wonderful note of love and beauty and art in the cosmos, we'll bring our podcast session to an end. It was so wonderful talking to you, Professor Kak, and I hope we actually get to have some more of these discussions and talks. And there is so much to dive into. And again, I cannot recommend enough this beautiful, wonderful piece of art, Project Omega, the future of life in the solar system. It's a whimsical journey, it's a scientific journey, and it's a reality and it's a fantasy all coming together as one. So thank you so much and namaste.
Thank you. Thank you, Sankrant. Namaste.